The wind moaned through the empty fields like a wounded animal, and the snow fell in thick, relentless sheets. Ethan pulled his wool coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged through the drifts toward his barn. The lantern in his hand flickered, casting soft, golden light over the frozen ground. It was near midnight, and the storm had only grown worse. He had already stoked the fire inside the farmhouse and fed the dogs, but something in his gut told him to check on the horses one last time. The hinges on the barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Warm breath misted in front of him, the scent of hay and animals grounding him in the bitter cold. His boots crunched over the straw as he made his way down the aisle, the horses shifting restlessly in their stalls. Ethan murmured to them softly, running his hand along their necks. That was when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost thought he imagined it. It came again, a low, trembling whimper from the far corner of the barn. His brow furrowed. It wasn't the sound of an animal, nor the wind through the boards. It was human. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the still air. "Who's there?" No answer, only the wind howling outside. Ethan lifted the lantern higher and took cautious steps toward the far stall. The flame quivered, stretching shadows across the wooden walls. Then, in the dim light, he saw her. A woman. She was curled up against the wall in the corner, half hidden behind a pile of old hay bales. Her wedding dress was torn and smeared with mud, the white fabric now gray with dirt. Her bare feet were bluish, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as she shivered violently. Her long brown hair was tangled, and snow still clung to the ends of it like tiny crystals. Ethan froze, the breath catching in his throat. Good Lord, he dropped to his knees beside her, lowering the lantern. Her eyes fluttered open, blue, glassy, full of fear. She tried to move away, but she was too weak. Hey, it's all right," Ethan said gently, holding his hands up. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You're safe." Her lips trembled, and when she spoke, her voice was a mere whisper. "Please, don't send me back." "Back?" he asked, confused. He shrugged off his coat and carefully draped it around her shoulders. She flinched at his touch, but the warmth of the fabric made her sigh softly. "You're freezing to death," he said, pulling the coat tighter around her. "We need to get you inside. There's a fire going." She shook her head weakly. "No, he'll find me." "Who?" Ethan asked, but she didn't answer. Her eyelids drooped, her body swaying. Panic surged in his chest. He scooped her up into his arms without another word, surprised at how light she was, as if she'd been hollowed out by fear and cold. As he carried her across the yard, the snow lashed against his face, stinging his skin. The wind fought him with every step, but he held her close, shielding her from the worst of it. She barely moved, her breath shallow, her fingers cold as ice against his neck. When they finally reached the house, he kicked the door open with his boot and stepped inside. The warmth of the fire hit them both instantly. Ethan shut the door with his foot and laid her gently on the couch near the hearth. The flames flickered across her pale skin, illuminating her features, a delicate face that might once have been radiant with joy but was now etched with exhaustion and pain. He threw more logs onto the fire, then ran to fetch blankets. When he returned, she was staring at the flames, dazed. He wrapped her in the thick wool, then crouched beside her. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked softly. For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "Clara." "All right, Clara," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady. "You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you." Her eyes flicked up to his face. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated, then shrugged slightly. "Because you need help. That's enough reason." She seemed to think about that, her lips parting as if to say more, but instead, tears welled in her eyes and rolled silently down her cheeks. Ethan felt something twist inside his chest. He hadn't seen a woman cry in years, not since his wife, Anna, passed away 3 winters ago. Since then, the house had been cold and quiet, a place of silence and routine. Now, with this fragile stranger sitting by his fire, it felt suddenly alive again, though he didn't know what to make of it. Clara tried to sit up, but her hands trembled too much. He helped her sip some warm water, then knelt again to meet her gaze. "You said someone might find you. Who is he?" She swallowed hard. "My fiancé. He left me at the church today." Her voice cracked. Said he couldn't marry a girl with nothing to offer. He laughed in front of everyone. Her fingers clenched around the blanket. I ran. I just ran until my feet bled. I didn't know where else to go. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. The snow outside beat against the windows, and the fire popped loudly in the silence that followed. You ran all the way here. I don't even know where. Here is, she whispered. I saw the barn lights through the storm. I just wanted somewhere warm to die. The words hit him like a blow. Don't you talk like that, he said, a rough edge creeping into his tone. You're alive now, and as long as you're in my house, you're not dying, you hear? She blinked, startled by his sudden firmness. Then, slowly, a faint smile ghosted across her lips, a fragile, fleeting thing. You're kind, she murmured. Ethan leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. Kind's not the word most folks use for me, he muttered, then caught her puzzled look. I live alone. Lost my wife a few years back. Been keeping to myself since. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. He nodded once. Don't be. Some things just happen. The fire crackled, filling the room with a comforting warmth. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, the air felt calm for the first time that night. Ethan draped another blanket over Clara and adjusted the logs in the fire. As he stood to leave, her hand caught his sleeve. Please, don't go. He looked down at her. Her eyes were wide, frightened, but not of him, of being alone again. I'll stay, he said quietly, pulling a chair closer to the fire. You rest now. She closed her eyes, and within minutes, her breathing steadied. Ethan sat there long after, watching the flames dance in the hearth. The storm outside began to fade into a distant whisper. For the first time in years, he felt something thaw inside his own frozen heart. The barn, the snow, the fear, all of it seemed like a bad dream fading into the warmth of the firelight. The first hints of spring crept slowly over the valley, melting away the long, cruel winter. The fields around Ethan's farm were still pale and muddy, but tiny shoots of green had begun to poke through the thawing soil. Each morning, Clara would stand by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and watch the mist lift from the hills. It was the same view she'd seen for months now, yet each time she looked at it, it felt a little less like someone else's land, and a little more like home. When Ethan had found her that terrible night, she hadn't expected to live. But he'd nursed her through fever, kept her warm, and made sure she ate. For weeks, she had barely spoken, haunted by the humiliation and heartbreak that drove her into the storm. But Ethan never pushed, never asked for details she wasn't ready to share. He just offered quiet company, and simple kindness, things she had not known in a very long time. Now, as the days grew longer, Clara had begun to find her rhythm again. She fed the chickens in the mornings, swept the porch, kneaded dough for bread while humming softly under her breath. The farmhouse, once still and silent, came alive again with small sounds, the clatter of dishes, the creak of a rocking chair, the faint tune of a voice that had forgotten how to sing. Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. He'd been a solitary man for too long. After his wife Anna's death, he'd lived like a shadow, tending the farm by habit rather than hope. But now there was laughter in the kitchen again, light spilling through the open windows, and a warmth that reached far deeper than the fire in the hearth. One morning, he came in from the fields, mud on his boots, and found Clara standing at the table rolling dough, flour dusting her cheeks like faint snow. You're making biscuits again, he asked, a half-smile tugging at his lips. She looked up at him shyly. You liked them last time. I did, he admitted. Haven't had them that good in years. A faint blush colored her cheeks, and she looked back down at the dough. You make it sound like I'm doing something special. You are, Ethan said quietly. You brought life back to this place. For a moment, she stopped rolling and looked at him, really looked at him. The deep lines on his face, the steadiness in his eyes. There was something about his honesty that made her chest tighten. She'd met men who spoke pretty words, made grand promises, and left her broken. But Ethan's voice held none of that. It was simple, steady, true. They ate breakfast together, as they always did, in companionable silence broken by small conversation about the weather, the fields, the new lambs. Afterward, Clara cleared the table while Ethan lingered, watching her move about the kitchen. You know, he said slowly, you could stay here as long as you want. You don't owe me anything. She froze, her back to him. I know, but if you ever want to go back, to town, to your family. I don't have one, she interrupted softly. Then she turned, her eyes glistening. And I won't go back to that man. Not ever. Ethan nodded. Then you stay here, as long as you need. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle ticking of the old clock. Clara took a deep breath. You've already given me more than I deserve. He looked at her for a long moment. Everyone deserves a second chance, Clara. She smiled faintly, her lips trembling. You really believe that? I have to, he said. Otherwise, what's the point of living? Over the next few months, the farm began to change along with them. Clara painted the shutters a pale blue, planted flowers along the porch, and hung fresh curtains in the kitchen. She found joy in the smallest things. The smell of rain on new grass, the warmth of bread right out of the oven, the quiet moments when Ethan would sit with her on the porch after sunset, neither of them saying much. It was during one of those evenings that everything shifted. The sky was painted in gold and rose, the horizon glowing as the sun dipped behind the hills. Clara sat on the porch steps, her skirt brushing the old wood, while Ethan brought out 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, and they watched in silence as the world slowly darkened. Do you ever miss her? She asked suddenly, her voice almost hesitant. Ethan didn't have to ask who she meant. Every day, he said simply. But grief's a strange thing. It doesn't go away, it just changes shape. Some days, it feels like a scar. Some days, like a memory I'm grateful for. Clara nodded. I think I understand that. He glanced at her. You lost someone too, in a way, she said quietly. Not to death, just to cruelty, to shame. When he left me at the altar, I thought I'd die of it. But now, she looked out at the darkening fields. Now I think maybe that was the best thing that could have happened to me. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Funny how life works like that. The night deepened around them. Crickets began to sing, and a cool breeze drifted through the air. Clara shivered slightly, and Ethan instinctively reached for the old quilt draped over the bench beside him. He placed it around her shoulders. Thank you, she murmured. He smiled faintly. You've said that every day for 3 months. She turned to him, eyes gleaming in the soft lamplight. Because I mean it every time. Their eyes met and held, and something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding that neither of them was ready to name. The next morning, Clara woke early to find Ethan already outside, working the fence line. She brewed coffee and brought him a cup. He took it with a grateful nod, sweat shining on his brow. You don't have to do all this, she said softly. You could have just let me go. He looked up at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. And miss out on your biscuits. Not a chance. She laughed, and the sound filled the air like birdsong. By the end of that day, something had changed inside her, a decision, small and quiet but sure. That evening, she waited for him on the porch again, just as the sun began to set. When he came up the steps, wiping his hands on a rag, she looked up at him with steady eyes. You gave me a new life, Ethan, she said. And I don't just mean saving me that night. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. A place to belong. He opened his mouth to speak, but she went on, her voice trembling. I don't want to keep calling it your home. I want to make it ours. For a long moment, he just stood there, the sunset painting his face in soft light. Then he smiled. The rare, quiet smile she'd grown to love, and took her hand in his. Then let's start again, he said simply. Clara's breath hitched, tears filling her eyes, but they were tears of joy. As the evening breeze swept through the valley and the first stars began to appear, Ethan wrapped his arm around her, and together they stood watching the horizon. For the first time in years, the farm wasn't just a place of work and memory, it was a home again. And for the first time since that terrible day at the altar, Clara no longer felt abandoned. She was where she was meant to be.